1219 AD, Samarkand, the most beautiful city in the world. Population, 500,000 people. Palaces of turquoise tile. Libraries holding the knowledge of centuries. Markets trading silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa. Samarkand was the crown jewel of the Islamic world. The Khwarazmian Empire, one of the most powerful in Asia. Its Sultan, Muhammad II, had an army of 400,000 soldiers. He had received a message from a Mongol chieftain from the northern steppes. The message said, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The Sultan laughed. He had 400,000 men. The Mongols were nomads, barbarians from the grasslands. He stopped laughing when the Mongol army appeared, simultaneously, from 3 different directions at once. From the north, from the east, and impossibly from the west. Through a desert his generals had declared impassable. Samarkand fell in 5 days. Of the 500,000 people who had lived there, a fraction survived. And the man who sent that message, the man who called himself the punishment of God, had started life as a 9-year-old boy whose father had just been poisoned by enemies, who was abandoned by his own tribe, who was captured and enslaved. His name was Temujin. The world would know him as Genghis Khan. And what he built, the Mongol War Machine, was the most devastatingly effective military force in human history. This is not just the story of conquest. This is the story of how a nation of nomads with no cities, no navy, no siege equipment defeated the most sophisticated armies on Earth again and again and again. Let's begin. Before we understand Genghis Khan, we must understand where he came from. Because the Mongol military genius was not invented by one man. It was forged over centuries by the harshest environment on Earth, the Eurasian steppe, an ocean of grass, stretching from Hungary in the west to Manchuria in the east, over 8,000 kilometers. Brutal winters, scorching summers, almost no permanent water sources outside river valleys. To survive on the steppe, you had to move, constantly, following grass for your animals, following water, following the seasons. This produced a people unlike any the settled world had encountered. Every Mongol man was a horseman from the age of 3, not a casual rider, a master. By adulthood, a Mongol warrior could ride 80 to 100 kilometers a day. He could sleep in the saddle. He could shoot a bow accurately at full gallop, forward, sideways, backward. The Mongol composite bow was a technological marvel. Made from layers of horn, wood, and sinew, compressed and glued, it had a draw weight of up to 170 pounds. Its effective range was 200 to 300 meters. European longbows of the same era had a range of 180 to 270 meters, but took years of physical training to use. Mongols trained from childhood. Every Mongol warrior maintained a string of horses, typically 5 or 6. When one tired, he switched. This gave Mongol armies a speed of movement that no other military force could match. And critically, the steppe produced something else, a culture of total warfare. On the steppe, you raided or you were raided. You were strong or you were dead. There was no middle ground, no mercy, no quarter. Weakness was not a misfortune, it was a death sentence. This was the world that made Temujin. 1162 AD, the Mongolian steppe, Temujin was born holding a blood clot in his fist. The shamans said it was a sign he would be a great warrior. His father, Yasuge, was a minor tribal chieftain, not powerful, not wealthy, but respected. When Temujin was 9, Yasuge was poisoned by Tatar enemies at a feast. He came home and died. What happened next tells you everything about steppe society. Yasuge's tribe, calculating that a widow with young children was a liability, abandoned the family. Left them on the steppe, alone, to die. They didn't die. Temujin's mother, Hoylin, kept her children alive through sheer will. They ate roots, berries, rats, whatever they could find. Temujin grew up in survival mode. Every day was a fight. As a young teenager, a rival tribe raided his family's camp. They captured Temujin and enslaved him, forcing him to wear a cane, a wooden collar restraint. He escaped with the help of a captor who pitied him. By his late teens, Temujin had almost nothing. No tribe, no army, no resources.
What he had was extraordinary intelligence, a capacity for loyalty and for inspiring loyalty, and an understanding of steppe politics that was years beyond his age. He began building alliances, carefully, strategically. He formed a blood brotherhood, Anda, with Jamuka, a powerful young chieftain. He allied with Togrul, the powerful Khan of the Karait tribe, who had been his father's ally. And then, step by step, he began defeating his enemies. The Tatars who had poisoned his father, the tribes that had abandoned his family, Jamuka himself, when friendship became rivalry. Each victory brought more followers. Each defeat of an enemy tribe was handled with ruthless strategic logic. Warriors who submitted were absorbed into his growing force.
Those who resisted were eliminated. By 1206, every tribe of the Mongolian steppe had been united under a single leader. At a great assembly, a Kurultai, the assembled chieftains gave him a new name, Genghis Khan. The precise meaning is debated. Universal ruler or oceanic ruler are the most common translations. He was approximately 44 years old. He had spent those 44 years surviving, fighting, and building. Now, he turned outward. The world had no idea what was coming.
Before we follow the conquests, we must understand the weapon, because Genghis Khan's greatest creation was not an empire. It was a military system. And that system was, by every measure, the most sophisticated and effective of its age. Structure: the decimal system. Genghis Khan organized his entire army on a decimal basis. Units of 10, an arban. Units of 100, a zun. Units of 1,000, a mingan. Units of 10,000, a tumen. This was not unique to the Mongols, but the way they applied it was revolutionary. Every unit had a clear commander. Every commander knew exactly what was expected. Communication up and down the chain was fast and clear. And critically, unit commanders were chosen on merit, not birth, not tribe, not family connections. This was radical. In virtually every other medieval army, officers were nobles. Men of high birth led men of low birth, regardless of ability.
In the Mongol army, a man who demonstrated courage, tactical skill, and loyalty could rise from herder to general. Some of Genghis Khan's greatest commanders, Subutai, Jebe, started as ordinary soldiers. Speed, the operational revolution. The Mongol army traveled without a supply train. Each warrior carried his own food: dried meat, a rule, dried curds, a skin of fermented mare's milk. In extreme circumstances, a warrior could open a vein in his horse's neck, drink some blood, and seal the wound, keeping the horse alive.
This meant the Mongol army could move at speeds that were literally incomprehensible to their enemies. A Mongol force could cover 100 kilometers a day, sustained over days. European cavalry of the same era typically managed 40 to 50 kilometers a day and could not sustain that pace. Enemies would plan their defenses based on where they expected the Mongols to arrive. The Mongols arrived somewhere else, days earlier than thought possible.
The feigned retreat, the most lethal tactic in military history. This was the Mongol signature move, and it destroyed armies across 3 continents. The Mongols would engage an enemy force and then run, apparently fleeing in panic, broken, defeated. Every military instinct says, chase them, break their retreat into a rout, finish them. Enemies charged every time and rode directly into a carefully prepared killing ground, where Mongol horse archers waited on the flanks, where the ground had been selected for maximum advantage, where the fleeing Mongols turned and became the hunters. The feigned retreat required extraordinary discipline. Soldiers had to appear to flee in panic while actually executing a precise tactical withdrawal, while maintaining unit cohesion, while knowing exactly when to turn. It failed? Essentially never. Psychological warfare. The Mongols understood something that most medieval commanders did not: that an army defeated in its mind is easier to defeat in the field. Before major campaigns, Mongol spies infiltrated target regions, gathering intelligence, spreading rumors, sowing panic. By the time the Mongol army arrived, civilian populations were already terrified. Cities that surrendered quickly were treated relatively well. Cities that resisted were made into examples, deliberately, publicly, with survivors allowed to flee and spread the story. Word traveled faster than armies. By the time the Mongols reached new territories, their reputation had already arrived. Engineering, the unexpected weapon. This is what truly shocked the settled world. Nomads were not supposed to be able to besiege cities. Genghis Khan changed this with characteristic pragmatism. He recruited the best siege engineers from every civilization he conquered. Chinese engineers, Persian engineers, Muslim engineers. He built a corps of specialists who could construct catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers from local materials. He learned, he adapted, he incorporated. The Mongol army that entered China used Chinese tactics. The army that fought Persia used Persian siege knowledge. The army that entered Europe combined everything it had learned from a dozen civilizations. It was a military system designed to get better with every campaign, like a machine that learned.
1211 AD, the Great Wall of China. The Jin dynasty of northern China was one of the most powerful states in Asia. Population of perhaps 50 million, vast armies, the Great Wall, fortified cities, sophisticated military technology. The Mongols had perhaps 100,000 warriors total. The Jin generals were not worried. Genghis Khan began his invasion of the Jin dynasty in 1211. What followed was not a single battle. It was a systematic dismantling of an empire. The problem of the wall. The Great Wall was designed to stop exactly this: nomadic raiders from the north, watchtowers, signal fires, garrisons. Genghis Khan didn't try to breach the wall directly. He found passes. He bribed local commanders. He used deception to get forces through at multiple points simultaneously, stretching Jin defenses to the breaking point. Once through the wall, Mongol cavalry spread across the landscape faster than Jin forces could respond. They didn't fight pitched battles if they could avoid it. They raided, burned, cut supply lines, isolated garrisons. The Battle of Yehuling, 1211.
The Jin sent a massive force. Estimates range from 150,000 to 300,000 to stop the Mongol advance. Genghis Khan met them in a mountain pass. He feigned retreat, drawing the Jin force into the open. Then 3 Mongol columns struck simultaneously. The Jin army, too large to maneuver quickly, was encircled and destroyed. Ancient sources describe the battlefield afterward as covered in bones for 30 miles. The Siege of Zhongdu, 1215. Zhongdu, modern Beijing, was the Jin capital. Massive walls, enormous garrison, food stockpiled for years. The Mongols couldn't take it directly, so they didn't try. They devastated the surrounding countryside, destroying every source of supply. They waited. For 4 years, they raided and burned and cut off everything that might reach the city. Zhongdu starved. In 1215, the city fell.
Marco Polo, passing through decades later, wrote that the plain outside the city was still white with bones. What China taught the Mongols. The Jin campaign lasted years, and it transformed the Mongol army. Genghis Khan absorbed Chinese siege engineers, administrators, and advisors. He saw how settled civilizations organized taxation, record-keeping, and governance. He didn't just conquer China, he learned from it. And he applied those lessons immediately in his next campaign, one that would become the most devastating in Central Asian history.
1218 AD, the Khwarazmian Empire. Stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, the Khwarazmian Empire was the dominant power of Central Asia and Persia. Sultan Muhammad II had 400,000 soldiers, fabulous wealth, great cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench. Genghis Khan did not initially want war with Khwarezm. This is critical and often overlooked. Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to Khwarezm. 450 merchants, hundreds of camels loaded with goods. A genuine diplomatic and commercial mission. The governor of the border city of Otrar, either suspecting espionage or simply motivated by greed, had every merchant in the caravan executed and seized the goods. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding justice. Sultan Muhammad had the ambassadors killed. This was the worst possible response.
On the steppe, killing an ambassador was an act of absolute war, an unforgivable violation of the most sacred laws of conduct. Genghis Khan reportedly went alone to a mountaintop for 3 days, praying, preparing. When he came down, the campaign was decided. The campaign that followed, 1219 to 1221, was not a war. It was an extinction event. Genghis Khan assembled perhaps 150,000 to 200,000 warriors. He divided them into multiple armies, a strategic masterstroke. Sultan Muhammad, facing what he thought was a single massive invasion from the east, distributed his forces across his major cities to defend them individually. He refused to concentrate his army for a decisive battle, fearing that losing one engagement would lose everything. He was right to fear it, and the distributed defense was still catastrophic.
Bukhara, February 1220. One Mongol force under Genghis Khan himself appeared at Bukhara, approaching from the west through the Kizil-Kum Desert, a route Sultan Muhammad had not defended because he considered it impassable. The city's garrison fled when they saw the Mongols. The civilian population had no choice. Bukhara surrendered. Genghis Khan rode his horse into the Great Mosque. He is reported to have addressed the population. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, he would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The city was looted. Much of it burned. The population, those who survived, were driven before the Mongol army as human shields for the next siege. Samarkand, March 1220. The jewel of the Islamic world. Garrison of 110,000 soldiers, including elite Turkic cavalry. Genghis Khan arrived with multiple converging columns. The garrison attempted a sortie, rode out to fight. The Mongols feigned retreat. Thousands of Khwarazmian cavalry chased them into a killing ground prepared by Mongol horse archers. The sortie was destroyed. The city surrendered within days. The pursuit of the Sultan. Sultan Muhammad fled. Genghis Khan sent his two greatest generals, Jebe and Subutai, with 20,000 men on an explicit mission: find the Sultan, chase him to the ends of the earth. What followed was one of the most extraordinary cavalry pursuits in history. Jebe and Subutai chased Muhammad across Persia, into the Caucasus, around the Caspian Sea.
Muhammad, broken and terrified, died on a small island in the Caspian Sea, of pleurisy, alone, without even a burial shroud. Urgench, the worst. Urgench, the Khwarazmian capital, resisted. The population fought street by street, house by house. The Mongols diverted a river to flood the city, then killed nearly the entire population. Ancient sources, which may exaggerate, speak of millions dead across the Khwarazmian campaign. Modern historians estimate the population of Central Asia dropped by perhaps 50% over the following decades, from war, famine, and the destruction of the irrigation systems that had made the region fertile. Cities that had existed for 1,000 years ceased to exist. Some never recovered. The Khwarazmian Empire, which had taken centuries to build, was erased in 2 years.
While Genghis Khan was destroying Khwarezm, he sent Jebe and Subutai on a reconnaissance in force that became one of the greatest military adventures in history. 20,000 men, 3 years, 8,000 kilometers. From Persia, they swung north through the Caucasus Mountains. They defeated the Georgians, who had one of the finest armies in the Christian world, twice. They emerged onto the Pontic Steppe, the grasslands north of the Black Sea. Here they encountered the Cumans, a powerful Turkic people who appealed to their neighbors, the Russian princes, for help. The Battle of the Sit River, 1223. A coalition of Russian princes and Cuman warriors, perhaps 80,000 men, pursued the Mongols. Jebe and Subutai feigned retreat for 9 days. 9 days of apparently fleeing, while the Russian coalition pursued, becoming strung out, separated, increasingly disorganized. On the 9th day, the Mongols turned. The Russian force was destroyed. Multiple princes were killed. The survivors were captured and executed in a characteristically Mongol fashion. The Mongols laid boards over the captives and held a victory feast on top of them, suffocating those beneath. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the Mongols vanished back east. Europe was stunned. Who were these people? Where had they come from? Why had they attacked and disappeared? The answer would come 15 years later, when Subutai returned with a real army, with orders to conquer.
1241 AD, Eastern Europe. Genghis Khan had died in 1227, but the machine he built kept moving. His son, Ogadai Khan, sent Subutai, now in his 50s, one of the greatest generals in history, to conquer Europe. Subutai commanded roughly 130,000 Mongol warriors. Facing them, the kingdoms of Poland, Hungary, and the Holy Roman Empire. Combined forces that could field perhaps 300,000 soldiers. But Subutai had something they did not: intelligence, preparation, and a strategic plan of breathtaking ambition. He divided his forces into multiple army groups to strike simultaneously across a front of over 600 kilometers. Poland, the northern flank. A northern Mongol force under Batu and Khadan swept through Poland. They defeated a Polish-German army at the Battle of Legnica, April 9, 1241. The Mongols reportedly sent back 9 sacks of ears, 1 ear from each enemy killed, to document the scale of the victory. The force then turned south, not to conquer Poland, but to prevent any European force from coming to Hungary's aid. Hungary, the main event.
King Bela IV of Hungary had gathered perhaps the largest army in European history to that point, somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 men, including crusading knights, Cuman cavalry, and infantry.
Bela felt secure. He had numbers. He had heavy cavalry. He had a fortified camp on the Sajo River. Subutai's plan was a masterpiece. One Mongol force, under Batu, attacked the main bridge over the Sajo River directly, a fierce, visible assault. The Hungarians rushed forces to defend the bridge. Meanwhile, Subutai himself, with a large force, found a ford several kilometers downstream, crossed the river at night in secret, and circled around behind the Hungarian camp. At dawn, the Hungarians found themselves being struck from the front and the rear simultaneously. The Battle of Mohi, April 11, 1241. The Hungarian army, caught between two Mongol forces, panicked. They broke. They fled. And here, Subutai showed his complete understanding of psychology. He left one gap in the encirclement, an escape route. The Hungarians flooded through it, abandoning their weapons, their armor, their organization. A broken mob fleeing through the Hungarian countryside. The Mongols pursued for 2 days, killing as they went. It is estimated that up to 25% of Hungary's population died in the subsequent months, from the battle, from the Mongol occupation, from famine. European kings sent desperate letters to each other, to the Pope. Who are these people? How do we stop them? They had no answer. No European army had come close to defeating the Mongols. Subutai was already planning the next phase, the conquest of Austria, Italy, and France. And then Ogedei Khan died. Mongol law required all senior leaders to return east for the Kurultai, the assembly to choose the next great Khan. Subutai's army turned east. Europe was saved, not by its own military power, but by the death of a man in Mongolia. Standing back from the conquests, what made the Mongol military so devastatingly effective? And what can we learn from it? Intelligence first. Before every major campaign, Mongol spies spent years in target territories. They learned the geography, they identified political tensions, which nobles hated their king, which cities had disputes with their neighbors. They assessed military strength, they mapped roads. The Mongol army never fought blind. It always knew the terrain, the enemy's strength, and the political landscape before the first arrow was fired. Adaptability. The Mongol army that invaded China was different from the one that entered Persia, which was different from the one that invaded Europe. Each campaign incorporated new technologies, new tactics, new specialists absorbed from conquered peoples. The Mongols had no ego about learning from their enemies. If a technique worked, they used it. If a tactic failed, they changed. Unified command. Medieval European armies were coalitions. Knights served their lords. Lords served their kings, sometimes. Command was contested, confused, political. The Mongol army had one chain of command. From the Great Khan down through the Tumans to the Arbans, every order was followed, immediately, without debate. Operational tempo. Speed was a weapon. The Mongols moved faster than their enemies could respond to, let alone plan against. By the time an enemy kingdom had gathered its forces and decided on a defensive strategy, the Mongols were already somewhere else. Terror as strategy. This is morally uncomfortable, but historically undeniable. The Mongols used terror deliberately and systematically. Cities that resisted were destroyed, completely, visibly, loudly. Survivors were sent to spread the story.
The result? Many cities chose to surrender without fighting, which saved Mongol lives and time. The terror wasn't random. It was rational military calculation. Meritocracy, perhaps the most underappreciated factor. In an era when military command was determined by birth, the Mongols promoted on merit. The result? Their officer corps was genuinely talented. The best commanders rose to the top. Subutai, arguably the greatest general of the medieval world.
was born a commoner, a blacksmith's son. He rose to command armies of 100,000 because he was simply better than everyone else. Genghis Khan died in 1227. The exact cause unknown. He was approximately 65 years old. He had conquered more territory in his lifetime than any person in history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire covered 24 million square kilometers, a quarter of the Earth's land surface, the largest contiguous empire in history. And the legacy is deeply complicated. The destruction. The Mongol conquests killed, by modern demographic estimates, between 30 and 40 million people, approximately 10% of the world's population at the time. Some regions, Central Asia, Northern China, Persia, lost half or more of their populations. Cities that had been centers of civilization for 1,000 years, Merv, Nishapur, Urgench, were erased and never recovered. The Islamic world's golden age, its centers of learning, science, and philosophy, was shattered. Some historians argue the Mongol conquests set the Islamic world back centuries.
The Pax Mongolica. And yet, once the conquest was complete, the Mongol Empire created something remarkable. A zone of stability enforced by Mongol military power, stretching from China to Europe. Trade routes that had been fragmented by competing kingdoms opened. The Silk Road, the ancient network of trade connecting east and west, functioned more freely than at any time before or since. Marco Polo's journey from Venice to China, described in the most famous travel account of the medieval world, was made possible by the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Technologies, ideas, and goods moved freely across Eurasia. Paper money, printing, gunpowder, Persian astronomical knowledge, Chinese medical techniques. These flowed west, helping seed the Renaissance. The genetic legacy. Studies of Y chromosome distribution across Asia have found that approximately 16 million men alive today are likely direct patrilineal descendants of Genghis Khan, roughly 0.5% of the world's male population.
The military legacy. Mongol tactics, feigned retreat, deep strategic encirclement, intelligence-first planning, unity of command were studied and applied by commanders across subsequent centuries. The German Blitzkrieg of World War II, fast armored columns striking deep into enemy territory, bypassing strong points, disrupting command and communication, has been described by military historians as a mechanized version of Mongol operational doctrine. The enduring question. Genghis Khan, monster or genius? Destroyer or builder? The answer is both, completely and simultaneously. He was a product of a world without mercy, who showed no mercy. He built a machine of war that was technically, operationally, strategically, the most effective the medieval world ever produced. And that machine killed tens of millions of people. There is no resolution to this contradiction. There is only the fact of it. The greatest conqueror in history was also one of history's greatest catastrophes. And 800 years later, we are still living in the world his conquests helped create. From a child abandoned on the Mongolian steppe to the ruler of the largest empire in history, Genghis Khan did not conquer through luck. He conquered through system, through intelligence, through relentless adaptation, through a military machine so far ahead of its time that no army on Earth could match it. He showed the world something it had never seen before and has rarely seen since. A military force that learned from every enemy it defeated, that turned conquered knowledge into future victory, that used speed, psychology, intelligence, and meritocracy as weapons. The Mongol War Machine was not just the greatest of its age, it may be the greatest in the history of warfare, and it was built by a man who started with nothing.
From the steppe to the world, And friends, the Mongols reached the gates of Europe. But one man had already walked through those gates 1,500 years earlier. A king who was never defeated in battle, who conquered Persia, Egypt, Central Asia, and the edges of India before the age of 32, who called himself the son of a god, and who wept because there were no more worlds left to conquer. Alexander the Great. The story of history's most legendary conqueror is coming next. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with anyone who loves history.